So I'm done with plot. Now I need characters. I decided I'm going with the video on types of character arcs in novels from iWriterly because it's character arcs ties a bit into plot, right? It's the same kind of, you have like structure, beginning, middle and end sort of thing. So because I already have the plot, I think I'm going to try to tie into what I already have, arrive at sort of character and then go from there and find out the specific person to whom it happens. Like I said, the video I want to look at today is from iWriterly, from Meg Latour. Also another Authortuber that has been around for 2017. 2017 was the year when it really kicked off, right? The Authortube thing. I feel like in 2017 there was a real wave of new Authortubers.
One of the biggest draws to stories of any medium are characters. So many of us want to follow the individual journeys of different characters because we find their personalities or situations compelling. The biggest disappointment that I have at the end of a book, a television show, or a movie is a lack of character growth or a lack of any kind of change at the end of the story. In other words,
I always wonder about that point because whenever I watch, especially Authortube videos, it's always kind of like people talk about how, you know, character is the most important thing for them. I think there's kind of like a bias against plot and in favor of character. So it's always kind of like if you have amazing characters, plot doesn't matter as much. It's not stated as plainly as that, not all the time, but kind of like that bias. And personally, I'm kind of a person who starts watching a show or starts reading a book because of the situation and basically the plot situation, and only through the story then start to like the character. So I'm not someone who is necessarily attracted to characters when I first see them in some way, but only once I really get to know them through the story. So I'm kind of wondering if that's just me. But I don't think so. I think a lot of people actually start stories because of the plot, the story itself, and only then go into character. And like she said, kind of like then at the end of the story, you obviously would expect it to have developed and the person to have grown into someone different or see some sort of change there.
a character arc is the inner journey of a character over the course of a story. If the principal characters don't grow or adapt as the plot is unfolding, the story can't develop organically.
Actually, one input here, but I think it's an advanced one, which is that there are characters that do not change, and because of that, the story happens. I don't know what to call them. They're kind of like immovable characters. They're in the Dark Knight, where basically the Batman character refuses to sink to the Joker's level and stays with his morals. It's kind of those characters, they are so strict in their own moral compass that even though a situation around them happens that would kind of push them to, go against those morals, they don't. So they themselves don't change, and often it's kind of like a tragic ending because they lose a lot due to their morals. But the story that happens is always very compelling. So a recommendation here would be the movie, I think it's called A Shield of Straw, a Japanese movie, where you have exactly one character who is like that. And the movie is extremely compelling, but the character doesn't really change. It's just tragic that he can't change.
Within the sequence of events is where the character arc needs to or should happen. In my opinion, in order to understand character arcs, we first need to understand or have a baseline of what plot development is. Most stories follow a similar sequence of events. According to the article, How to Write a Compelling Character Arc in Reedsy, a character arc maps the evolution of a character's personality through a story. Characters will find their strengths and weaknesses tested over the course of the story so that by the time they arrive at the story's end, they are a changed person. These changes might not be monumental, but they will have made a significant impact on the character, either positively or negatively.
I like that she includes resources and that she links the source of what she's saying, because that's a big point of what I find kind of frustrating with Authortube, especially now, I think. Like I said, this video is from 2019. I don't know if she continued doing that or if she changed her style, but basically it's this thing that there's so much advice, so much writing advice, and obviously not everything applies in the same kind of situation, right? So it's really more different tools that you should be aware of, so that when you have a specific writing problem, you can go and look for the right tool for you in that situation. And for me, it's always really helpful to know where the original source of the advice comes from, you know, what it is based on, rather than just hearing someone's opinion. So that's why resources, sources, links, very useful, just to be able to track it back. And if it's either based on someone's experience, look at their work and see how they did it, you know, if it's not explicitly stated. The other thing that she talks about here is the plot development. So the plot development that she laid out here is obviously just one approach, right? So it's kind of like a plot structure, and the one that I'm using here is this whole plot embryo story circle structure, and the one that she mentioned here is just a different kind of structure. So that's why I'm going to try to apply the character arc to my existing one, because I'm working with that. But if I'm understanding it correctly, then the idea is basically that you take this plot structure here, it's called plot development, and what's the name of the actual thing? Yeah, here it's basically the structure for the rising action thing, and tie the character arc into that. So that's what we're doing here.
I will read a direct quote about the positive change. When the protagonist overcomes external obstacles and internal flaws in order to become a better person, we can describe this as a positive arc. It's often used in the story structure such as the hero's journey. A character arc with a positive change consists of, number one, the goal. This is what the character wants to achieve or work towards at the start of the story. Number two, the lie. This is a deeply rooted misconception about themselves or the world that keeps them from reaching their true potential. And number three, the truth. This is when the character rejects the lie and embraces the truth, which leads to self-improvement. Consider carefully what your character wants versus what they actually need when you're considering the goal and the lie.
Basically, the thing that she's saying here is that you have the want, which is the goal, then you have the lie, which also is the need, the flaw, something to overcome that holds you back, and then finally you have this moment of truth. And if we look at the story circle here, we basically have some of those elements already integrated here, right? So first of all, it's the you, which would traditionally introduce the character and set up where the character is. Now, if you remember, in the first video, I kind of defined that I want the story to be different character viewpoints, and tied together, those basically make up the whole of humanity, kind of giving humanity's story, but telling it through different characters. I think that for me means that I have to define an overall character arc in terms of what is humanity's character arc, and then for each of the viewpoint characters have their own mini character arc, which doesn't necessarily have to be like it. Obviously, they only get like a small chunk of the story focused on them, right? So it's more kind of like quickly introducing their specific problem, how that ties in with their specific flaw maybe, and then how that resolves before we pass on viewpoint to the next character. So we could say if it's a positive character arc, then it would be what happens based on the plot. The beginning of the story is they live peacefully, end of the story is they have to flee their own world in order to survive. How is that positive? So that means that at the end of the story they would have had to learn something that they didn't know about themselves before. And one thing that you could say is that the humans in this world are the dominant species, so they didn't have any threats challenging their peaceful life until then. So what if that is kind of like their flaw, so that we see how they treat other living things in their world, and then the fruit flies, this external threat comes into their world and challenges their position, talking about them. And now they're basically in the same situation as those other living creatures and understand better what it means to not be the dominant species. So it could be kind of like, that's not necessarily a positive realization, but it's probably a positive change if it means that they, going forward, they would treat other living things better. Problem here is that the story is ongoing, right? So it's just, if it was just a standalone story, then they would win at the end of the story, learn how they've been treating other living things in their world badly, like animals, plants, whatever, and change their ways, right? Or due to their being less humans, that would happen naturally, stuff like that, kind of like. So that would be the positive change, right? But because it's ongoing, you have people in a crisis who are trying to survive still, so this positive change wouldn't have happened yet. It's not, the priority isn't that high, right? So the overall character arc here would have to extend throughout the future storyline and also throughout the present storyline and make a change there. So that's why I'm not necessarily happy with the positive change in that sense. Let's see what's the negative one. I like the idea of having some tragedy or something in there.
Sometimes the struggle gets the better of people. Characters are no exceptions, as they are also impacted by their circumstances. In a negative change, we will see a character's downward spiral. A character arc with a negative change consists of, number 1, the goal, number 2, the lie. This is a belief that achieving a certain goal can bring about a positive outcome. And number 3, the truth. The lie in some way was self-destructive and brings about a negative change.
I think the negative character arc is going to work better because if you remember, in the story, there was the idea that basically at the beginning, people get affected by whatever is turning them into some sort of monster creature. And at first, other people seeing those monsters are afraid of them, thinking that they're going to attack, but then they don't attack. And then it becomes hyper-focused on helping those people, creating pity for those people, being afraid of others being affected, stuff like that. And then just when it starts to settle into that and they let their guard down, those creatures do attack, and then they turn out to even be consciously attacking and smart and organized. And then it's kind of like this moment of betrayal, and trust breaks down, fear sets in, and that could be kind of like the whole where it starts out rather positively, which you wouldn't necessarily probably expect as a reader. I would imagine that if I read a story like that and I see people turning into monsters, my first expectation would be that the other people in the story, the other characters, would react hostile. And then if you had like some sort of hint or some sort of viewpoint insight that those creatures are still people who are trying to communicate but can't, and how desperate their situation is, then that would be even more, kind of dramatic to read, because we know that they are looking for help and they're getting attacked, right? So that's what I would probably expect in that kind of story setting. And so the idea here is that to subvert that and to have the other characters really react like the reader would want them to help those creatures and to understand that they can't communicate and stuff, only to be betrayed. And turns out they should have never tried to help them or never trusted that they're still people, stuff like that. So that the reader experiences the betrayal moment as well. And that would be kind of like, is that already the lie that they believe? Because it's not supposed to be the lie. It's supposed to be what they did, helping those people in the beginning, was the right thing to do from an overall thematic viewpoint. Because the whole thing is that humans as a species are being attacked, and the only way that they're going to survive this invasion is basically that they work together and fight back as one species, right? And the idea that this mistrust and all that fear setting in breaks that apart is really the thing that would end up killing them. So I like the idea that we start out with actually a fairly well-working society, with fairly compassionate, sort of. So if you looked at it from a family viewpoint, it would be a well-functioning family where there's trust and stuff, and then that breaks down due to those creature attacks, and that turns into mistrust and everybody for themselves. That's kind of like the microcosm of what would happen to a single family where there's one family member affected, and the same thing happening on a global scale for all of humanity. And that's the lie, right? That they shouldn't believe that they can't trust anyone and that they're better off just helping themselves or following their own agenda. So by that logic, does the story, the future storyline, end with them starting to believe the lie? Because, like I said, it can't be a complete character arc, right? It has to tie into the present storyline. So the first thing is the goal, right? And the story, when it starts off, the goal is to save those people who turn into creatures. And then the lie there basically is you should have never tried to do that because due to your sentiment or whatever, those creatures were able to trick you into some sort of trap that wipes out most of the human defense forces, something like that. And then from there, that basically spirals into humanity as a whole kind of falling apart and everybody for themselves. So now they're in the worst state. And that's what they learn. Seems a bit bleak, right? Because they did the right thing and they're just getting punished for it. But okay, sure. Let's do that. And then what we have left over are broken characters, and the broken characters, they need to deal with the present storyline while being broken. Seems like a good starting point to make it more dramatic and more engaging. So yeah, okay, I'm breaking characters. First part is the goal that they have, right? So the goal spans all the way until there, after the first plot twist. So that's the first part. So basically 1 and 2 are character arc, the goal, which is save affected people because they are still people. So that was right after the first mini plot twist that we created yesterday, which is that they are people and they are in need of help, and that's the goal that the characters have. And they would have had that even before then, right? But in a different kind of way. In the beginning, it's more what is happening. Then it's people who are turning into creatures. How is that possible? How can we stop that from happening? And then it's, oh no, they are still conscious, so how can we save them? So it's basically all tying a bit into the same goal of stopping this from happening so that not more people are affected. That's the goal. And then they believe the lie until the next plot twist. That's very convenient. So after the next plot twist, no, actually, after this plot twist, they learned the truth. So is it this one? So the lie is basically that they still believe that those creatures can be saved. Even when the creatures start attacking, it seems like they're doing it mindlessly. So the general majority of people are still very much in favor of trying to save them, because probably a lot of the ones who would be in favor of that have loved ones or whatever who are affected. Then that's kind of like the general lies. We're still trying to save those people. They still can be saved. And then they learn the truth, which is that those things, whatever they are now, they are organized and they're smart and they're attacking on purpose. So whoever used to be this person probably isn't in there anymore, or has, for some reason that we don't understand, switched sides. That's a problem. They learn the truth already at the midpoint. So then afterwards, the character arc is basically over. That's a bit unfortunate. In the story circle, the change happened. The change became visible at 8, right? When they come back into their own world and are now a different person. And what happens actually at 6, where basically they decide to do something else. So at 5, they learn the truth. And at 6, due to having learned that truth, they have to make a decision of how to go forward. Basically how to pick themselves back up. And here at 6, I have that in the second plot line, it's basically everybody for themselves, right? So that's where this part of the character arc happens. I just don't really understand what that means for the rest of the story. If the overall human character arc has already been achieved, how does that affect the the smaller ones, so the viewpoint characters, because maybe it's the contrast that could work here, where basically the overall story has become so bleak that they have given up on trying to help each other and save each other, but then we still have the plotline one where people are finding the time travel and having a new hope, right? So maybe what it should be is a negative character arc for plotline 2 and a positive character arc for plotline 1. So the positive character arc is for the ones who are in the other world and find the time travel, and the negative character arc is for the ones who are in the human world and who have just lost whatever battle happened there. For both storylines, they basically start to spread apart at two, where they find out two things. That one is help the affected people, those are the ones who stay in the human world, and the others who are going into another world to find out what happened in the first place. So both kick off here, and the ones who are going into the other world don't know that their own world has been overrun, because at the point when they're leaving, it's very much still the situation of trying to save the affected people, which is so far still a relatively small number of people. So that's why the goal for both of them would be the same thing, right? So both character arcs start out with save the affected people, because they're still people, and stop the spread, basically. So plotline 1, their goal is stop it from spreading further by finding out what it is. And plotline 2 is save the ones who have already been affected, keep it contained until we have more information. Both have the same goal. There, we can come back to the whole thing about superiority and feeling like they're the dominant species. So in plotline 1, the positive character arc, they could learn that we're not alone in the universe because they found a different civilization. We're not that as advanced as we thought we are. This is not just some sort of virus or whatever that we can handle. So basically, the lie that they believed is that they're much more advanced than they are, and that this is a situation that they are equipped to handle. And then they learn the truth that they aren't, and that they basically are much lower on the, kind of like species food chain than they thought they were, in terms of when you look at the whole, what is it, a universe, multiverse, something like that. So basically in plotline 1, they learn we're not the most advanced species there is, and basically having their ego put in check, right? Which they will need in order to be able to survive, to not underestimate whatever they're fighting. And in plotline 2, they are learning the same thing, which is that those creatures are smart and they are organized, and this is an organized attack. So, but then it is a negative thing, because it means that the people who were focused on helping them basically give up on them, right? So it's the same goal, the same lie, different effects. So that would mean that when we go to the truth, one of them learn we're on our own, right? So the plotline 2 is we're on our own, you can't help anyone, you just can't save yourself, right? Whereas in plotline 1, they of course find the time travel. So kind of the idea would be that in the truth, basically in plotline 2, people are sort of figuring out we can't help each other, we're on our own, right? But in plotline 1, they are finding the other civilization, the time travel, and because of that other civilization's advanced technology, they actually get another chance themselves, right? So they just learned that they're not alone in the universe or whatever, probably. I don't know enough about the world yet to be sure that they wouldn't have known that. But probably they learned that, and they also came across another civilization that actually has stuff that can help them. So not only are they not alone, they're actually getting help from another species, civilization that never even knew they existed, probably. Something like that, right? So kind of like, again, sort of the same structure but different outcomes due to their different situations. I really like that. I like the mirroring aspect of it. And it's also pretty fascinating to see how basically the positive and the negative character arc are the exact same thing, right? Just playing out differently due to circumstances.
Versus no character arcs. Not all characters need to undergo a transformative change. Often, minor characters experience flat arcs, while our protagonist or principal characters will experience more noticeable or defined arcs. But flat character arcs aren't the same as no character arcs. A flat character arc involves no change or growth for the character. The protagonist or character is the same at the end of the story as they were at the beginning. According to the Writer's Edit article, create compelling characters with these 3 types of character arcs. Flat character arcs are most often found within certain genres, such as mystery, or Sherlock Holmes for example, adventure, such as Indiana Jones, and spy thrillers, such as James Bond. If the character arc in your story appears static, it might mean that your character is underdeveloped, which can be...
I have a question here. The examples that you mentioned, Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, kind of, isn't the reason why these characters don't necessarily have a character arc because they're serialized and their stories are episodic? So kind of like similar to a TV show where you don't really change the characters that much because they can't learn a very big lesson at some point, because then you very much take out the drama of the story, right? It seems like then the story is over. So that's why a lot of sitcom characters or stuff like that, they don't really learn anything. They don't really undergo a character arc, because then they can go on infinitely with their daily adventures, their episodic formats. And I think especially James Bond and Sherlock Holmes are kind of even more special in that sense, because they've become like those iconic characters that get reinvented over and over, right? So that they are basically, you can't give James Bond a character arc beyond the current James Bond who is playing the character, because then it would have been, how long has it been? Like 50 years. So the character had like, they would have had to have a character arc spanning over 50 years. And if they had like the first 3 movies or so where the character learned something significantly, they would have to keep that lesson and apply it in the next movie, and then the character doesn't really have a flaw anymore. You know what I mean? So it's basically, isn't that one of the reasons why these characters don't necessarily have character arcs, so that they can go on forever and have that longevity? So, because in other spy thrillers, if I think about it, I mean, the problem with spy thrillers seems to be often once you have one that really works very well, it is turned into a series that then also goes on forever, right? And then they seem to lose their character arcs, because I would argue that some spy thrillers, they did have character arcs in the beginning of the series, and then because they became serialized, they lost that. So in the first Jason Bourne book, I felt there was a character arc. We started out with a character who didn't know who he was, and at the end of it very much changed not to be that person anymore, right? Once he learned who he used to be. So yeah, that's kind of like my question there. Is that the case? Is it because of that? Because basically they are serialized and that's why they don't have a character arc, but otherwise they would need one. So if you only write one spy thriller and your character doesn't change, is it still as satisfying and as fun to read? And how would you do it, right?
Jeff Lyons differentiates a story from a situation, which is what K.M. Weiland goes into in her article. A situation is a problem or predicament with an obvious and direct solution. A situation does not reveal character, it tests problem-solving skills. A situation has no or few subplots, twists, or complications. A situation begins and ends in the same emotional space that it started in. According to...
Yeah, so that's exactly the sitcom or the TV show character, right? The episodic one that has to start at the status quo again so that the next episode can happen in the same manner. Okay, so yeah, that's why they don't necessarily need a character arc. I get that. And the other thing, that would be the example that I gave at the beginning, right, where you have like a character, because the character doesn't change, the story happens, and it would be probably some sort of moral situation where the character themselves are either a very highly moral character that embodies an optimum, or maybe the opposite could be true as well if they embody some sort of extreme negative. Not sure if with the extreme negative if that would be a very fun story to read, but I think it would be possible. How do I find my characters? I'm not actually further along with that one than I was before, right? So, do you want to do a bonus thing? I have an idea. So, if you're actually good with, you have your character and now you have your character arc and you sort of been able to apply that and you want to move on to develop plot, then you can go to this video and do that. But if you're in the same situation as I am and you don't know who your characters are, then maybe you want to take a detour with me going here, because I am going to try out stereotype characters, I think. Just to have a starting point for my characters. So either see you there or see you here. Bye.